Russian President Vladimir Putin is forced to tear up the pages of his plans when every plan he has made for the Ukraine war has failed. The course of the war was determined by the Russian army in the first days, and the advances of the Russian army drew the logbook of the war. However, after this short-term advance, successive unsuccessful attempts of the Russian army pushed them to take a defensive position and then retreat. The fate of the war these days is clearly determined by the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine. In Zaporizhia, the Ukrainian armed forces continued to advance quietly and overshadow critical areas in Melitopol, even though the attacks of the Russian army have increased in Bakhmut. Especially in Solder, they cannot break through the incredible defensive wall of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Russian casualties are increasing day by day. New breakings are happening in Kherson too. However, the region with the most activity in recent days stands out as the Crimea attacks on Crimea by the armed forces of Ukraine are being carried out one after another. Crimea will definitely be the breaking point of this war. And these explosions definitely mean something, especially in recent days. The Ukrainian armed forces have been attacking with unmanned aerial vehicles, and Russian air defense systems are trying to prevent these attacks. However, it would not be correct to say that the Russian air defense systems have been able to cope with this very well. So far, in the reports published today, it was reported that explosions occurred one after another in Crimea. The explosions were reported to have occurred in the afternoon of January 10th. According to local residents, tail traces from anti-aircraft guided missiles are visible in the sky, which may indicate that the cause of the explosions was a reflection of another attack from Ukraine. So far, there is no official statement on this from the Russian-backed authorities of the Crimean Peninsula. But video footage taken by local residents shows that Russia may indeed be the result of the work of its air defense systems. At the moment, it's not possible to determine exactly what the Russian anti-aircraft guided missiles hit. The occurrence of explosions could mean a successful Ukrainian airstrike. Russian air defense systems cannot reach the Roswell's Kiev part of the peninsula. It is noteworthy that shortly before the explosions, Sevastopol Governor Mikhail Vasilyev could hear the sounds of the applause from the residents of the city, training from the Russian army. But it's not specified whether this was caused by the thunderous explosions. However, before this attack in the afternoon, we saw Ukrainian drones paint Sevastopol red. Ukraine launched a new attack on Crimea about 44 hours before the last attack. At around 3 a.m. in the morning, 2 violent explosions occurred in the Sevastopol region. According to published reports, the Russian air defense system shot down a drone over the North Pier. The source of the second explosion is unknown. This was the second wave of attacks reported by Crimea in the last 3 days. Previously, 4 drone attacks and explosions were reported between January 1st and January 6th, as well as between December 20th and 31st of last year. Explosions and drone attacks were reported 4 times in the skies of Crimea. As a result, there has been an explosion in Crimea for 10 days of the last 20 days. If you remember, historical attacks were carried out on the navy and military facilities of the invading Russians in Crimea in August and November. The most recent large-scale attack was in the port of Sevastopol by Ukrainian drone armies in November and damaged 3 ships, including the Admiral Makarov of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet. The meaning of these successive attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces is clear. The Ukrainians want to surround the peninsula from 2 directions in order to open an end corridor to the Crimea and to liberate the peninsula, which was unjustly annexed by Russia in 2014 with a major land operation for this land corridor. Melitopol and Kherson must be completely liberated for this. The armed forces of Ukraine regularly destroy Russian air defense systems, ammunition depots, and military installations in Melitopol and Kherson. If you remember, the Ukrainian armed forces used the same strategy. When the first part of Kherson was liberated, Ukraine began to clearly show the basis of its attack on Crimea. This thesis also received support from the USA. The United States has declared that the armed forces of Ukraine are ready to attack the Crimea. The American general, Ben Hodges, said that the Ukrainian troops had enough weapons to begin the attack on the Crimea. The main problem for Kiev is simply the lack of direct access to the peninsula. But according to Hodges, the situation can change significantly during the summer months. According to Ben Hodges, having taken control of the right bank of the Kherson region, the Ukrainian armed forces actually began to control the main approaches to the Crimea. In his opinion, if the armed forces of Ukraine attempted an offensive in the Zaporizhia region, the armament of the armed forces of Ukraine would be sufficient to fully control the logistics of the peninsula and the Kherson region. Hodges states that the recent undermining of the bridge in Melitopol and the attacks by himars systems in this area are evidence that the Ukrainian forces are trying to destroy existing logistical targets, thereby minimizing the supply of Russian troops. On the other hand, the Russian army repulsed the air defense attacks quite successfully, and during a recent offensive, the Ukrainian armed forces were driven from the settlement, leaving Kiev. Doroshenko is less likely to take any action. When we examine each of these attacks on the map, it can create an entrance straight to the Crimea via Melitopol and Kherson. If this military strait reaches Armyansk, it may be too late for everything for the Russian army. At the same time, the capture of Melitopol by the Ukrainian armed forces will strategically threaten the Mysore and Peninsula regions of Crimea given the course of the war. These difficulties, combined with Ukraine's ardent defensive effort backed by Western military assistance, allowed Ukraine to retake thousands of miles of territory it had previously occupied and turn the tide of the war in its favor. Crimea is a territory that Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014 and has been controlled by Moscow ever since, but remains a major point of contention between the two Eastern European countries. Ukrainian leaders have said that they hope to restore control of Crimea in any possible negotiations to end the war. Of course, time is on Ukraine's side. There are no manpower issues and their logistical situation is getting better every week. Not a single Russian soldier actually wants to be there, and the sanctions hurt. Ukraine can liberate Crimea by the end of August. At the same time, optimism about Ukraine's chances of retaking Crimea could be boosted by continued shifts in the army. The West does not provide assault weapons to its army, and they are now trained at large troop levels. The Ministry of Defense announced last month that it plans to train Ukrainian troops in combined armed maneuvering, which it describes as what makes Western armies so good. If they learn to do the combined arms maneuver on this scale, they certainly can. They will be able to act at the same time and fully extinguish the fires with Western intelligence. They will have better situational awareness and better morale. Still, we know that the fight to recapture Crimea will be brutal as Russia has built strong defenses there. We should also say that Crimea should be Ukraine's last target because of the risk of failure. In other words, after the Russian army is completely dispersed at the front, it will be much more accurate to carry out a ground operation after the Crimean defense is broken by airstrikes. Kiev carried out a similar attack west of Kherson. For this reason, they saw how successful an operation could be. They also know that they can perform this type of operation. They should be mindful that as the war drags on, Ukraine will risk losing more soldiers, and Western supplies may dry up as some members oppose the Ukrainian side. If Ukrainian military leaders make the wrong choice and lose equipment, the war will definitely be resolved in this region, and everything will be over the day that the Crimean War is concluded. Because Crimea is so critical, every explosion and attack must be carefully scrutinized. The war between Ukraine and Russia completely changed the military, socio-economic, diplomatic, and political decisions and approaches of the countries of the world. The world has become a bipolar center, while the majority of the world supports Ukraine against the Russian invasion. There is a minority group that secretly helps Russia among the countries that support Ukraine. Turkey draws serious attention, especially in recent days. Turkey, which has a very important strategic position, is seen as a guarantor country in terms of Russia not creating any threat or dangerous situation in the Black Sea, because the Black Sea and the Crimean Peninsula, which are very important in terms of the Ukraine-Russia war, are among the regions that Turkey should take part in security control. In addition, Ukraine, which is far behind Russia in terms of navy, needs a country's support in this regard. At this point, the party that comes into play is Turkey, especially against the threats of Russia in the Black Sea. Turkey took a huge and historical step. The Turkish Navy has announced the entry into service of the country's largest warship, the new flagship TCG Anadolu. Even the USA did not expect such a move from Turkey. Russia was also shocked that TCG Anadolu has now joined Turkey's navy. This gigantic amphibious assault and aircraft carrier, already considered the #1 protector of the Black Sea, will also be the protector of the Mediterranean. The reason for this is that the control of the straits is in the hands of the Turkish government with the Montreux Convention. In other words, the Turkish army will be able to direct TİK Anadolu from the straits to sea areas that are likely to be at risk at any time. The Turkish Navy's TCG Anadolu aircraft carrier is completely changing the balance of power in the Black Sea and shifting it to NATO's control. Now let's take a closer look at the new, gigantic Lord of the Seas together TCG Anadolu. Based on the design of Spain's Juan Carlos, one amphibious assault ship was recently lowered to the sled at Sedef shipyard in Istanbul. TİK Anadolu aircraft carrier will enter the Black Sea from the Bosphorus on April 24th. The Turkish naval forces celebrated the striking moment with the opening ceremony, which had held about 3 months after the actual delivery of the ship due to calendar conflicts. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also announced at the ceremony, held in Sedef, that 70% of the ship was built using parts and components made in Turkey. Among these, there are many more parts, including weapons, war systems, radars, infrared search tracking capability, and electronic warfare package in Anadolu. Erdogan added that Anadolu has a variety of additional capabilities it can provide, including command and control, medical support, and humanitarian assistance. According to figures released by the Turkish Ministry of National Defense, TCG Anadolu is 758 feet long, approximately 105 feet wide, and has a displacement of 27,436 tons. The ship has a top speed of approximately 21 knots at full load, a range of 9,000 nautical miles, and can operate at sea for up to 90 days. In a press release issued by the Turkish Ministry of National Defense, it was noted that TCG Anadolu could carry a 1,400-man battalion in addition to its crew of approximately 400 sailors. In terms of land assets capacity, this ship can carry 13 tanks, 27 amphibious assault vehicles, 6 armored personnel carriers, 33 light and heavy armored vehicles, and 15 trailers. Anadolu can also carry up to 6 different types of landing craft at the well dock. One of the most impressive features of the ship is its 58,600 square foot flight deck in a ski jump configuration with 6 landing points for medium lift, transport attack, or general purpose helicopters, and an additional 2 points for heavier transport types. The TCG Anadolu is also classified as an amphibious assault ship, but officials in Turkey suggest they have big plans to use this ship as a carrier for armed drones of varying degrees. The Turkish Ministry of National Defense said in a statement that according to the operation, to be carried out within the scope of aircraft transport capability, 12 manned and unmanned warplanes, 21 different types of helicopters, and armed UAVs could be deployed to the TCG Anadolu amphibious aircraft carrier. In addition, Bayraktar TB3 with new folding wings designed by Turkish drone manufacturer Baykar is currently expected to be Anatolia's primary armed drone after years of increasing popularity of the Turkish company Baykar. The TB3 gained particular importance during the ongoing war in Ukraine. These drones are the key evolution of the battle-proven Square B2. However, the TB3 is currently being specifically designed to take off and land on aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships with short runways. TİK Anadolu will be a fortress on the sea for TB3 drones because jet-powered Kızılelma drone is similarly designed to take off from short runway carriers. So it will be part of Anatolia's Airwing. Baykar company defines this vehicle as Turkey's first warplane-armed UAV. The company announced that the Red Apple will have an endurance of 5-6 hours, a combat radius of 500 nautical miles, a service ceiling of 35,000 feet, and a top speed close to Mach 1. The fact that this powerful armed UAV will be on the alert at all times aboard the TCG Anadolu is quite a deterrent with limited deck space for fighter jets and other vehicles. This ship has an interception gear system for landing under real-world conditions. Presumably there is a fast jet plane system that covers the entire deck for takeoff on board. In addition, this ship will be able to carry out military and humanitarian operations in every corner of the world when needed. This ship is seen as a symbol that will reinforce Turkey's regional leadership position. Anadolu has a typical landing helicopter dock configuration with a large flight deck at the top and a well deck at the rear. TİK Anadolu is designed to project forces onto and during an amphibious attack using helicopters, landing craft, and both light and heavy armored vehicles. Since DCG Anadolu was first ordered in 2015, it has become a unique multi-purpose ship that can also focus on unmanned aerial operations. In February this year, it was reported that TCG Anadolu will undergo a slight refurbishment of its infrastructure to better support unmanned aerial operations in order to realize the change in the air wing. This modification will help to introduce drone control stations with satellite terminals for longer-range connections and to launch uncrewed aircraft. By transforming Anadolu into a drone, mothership was not always the main focus of his development. The F-35s, or AV-8Bs, were originally supposed to play an important role for this aircraft. However, since the F-35s did not come to Turkey, TCG Anadolu was made much more suitable for fully armed UAVs, helicopters, and other aircraft over time. It's also known that the ship's compatible rotary wing assets include T-129, Attic and Th-1 Super counterattack helicopters, as well as types such as 6 anti-submarine warfare helicopters. Turkish President Erdogan stated that the fixed-wing Jet trainer light fighter aircraft can also land and take off from Anatolia. Considering all this data, Turkey's plans for DCG Anadolu also underline the country's desire to increase its ability to project power on a regional and even global scale. After the earthquake that devastated the country in February, the humanitarian aid capacity that Anadolu will provide cannot be underestimated. Now that TCG Anadolu has officially joined the Turkish Navy's fleet, it will certainly be interesting to see how the warship proves its multi-role operation concept with so much reliance on multiple types of drones. As armies around the world increasingly move towards integrating uncrewed assets into their operations, Turkey has already broken ground on this. After that, we will witness together what will be the moves of Ukraine's bravest ally, Turkey's defense industry, and what kind of military assistance Ankara will provide to the Kiev administration for the war with Ukraine and Russia. One of the most important developments in the Russia-Ukraine war is undoubtedly fires since the day Putin started his invasion of Ukraine. The number of fires in Russia with unknown causes has been increasing. These fires usually occur at military points and official buildings belonging to the invaders. Considering the location of the fires, war commentators make predictions about the cause of the fires. It is assumed that the fires, which caused huge losses for Russia, were initially set by Ukrainian sabotage and partisan groups, which quite the organized operations for Ukraine on Russian territory have had a major impact on the Russian-Ukrainian war. In addition, another group that comes to mind as the cause of the fires is the anti-occupation Russian public and Russian youth who do not want to take part in the occupation of Ukraine. This is because the severity of the fires increased even more with the mobilization order announced in the first year of the war. The Russian people do not want to die for Putin's personal interests. Therefore, the Russian people may be burning military posts and official buildings in Russia in order to make Putin give up the occupation. Another suspect in the fires in Russia is the Russian oligarchs. The oligarchs who are preparing for the post-Putin administration in Russia may burn various points in the country to harm Putin and prepare the ground for his resignation. All these comments and allegations show that Russian leader Vladimir Putin is full of problems. These problems Putin is experiencing are increasing day by day, so much so that a fire broke out in Moscow, the capital of Russia, recently. This fire occurred in the building of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Moreover, the ministry building was very close to the Kremlin, and Putin was hosting Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko in the Kremlin during the fire. The cause of the fire, which broke out in the evening, has not yet been announced. A Russian news agency reported the fire with the following sentences: at around 7:30 p.m. in one of the administrative buildings of the Defense Ministry in Moscow, officials detected smoke in the building. The fire brigade and emergency services arrived on the scene. Thousands of social media users shared images of the fire that broke out and the Russian Defense Ministry building on Moscow's Nemenka Street. In the shared images, the dark clouds rising from the ministry building are clearly visible. After the fire in the Ministry of Defense building, the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations sent its teams to the region. Dozens of fire brigades intervened in the fire, along with search and rescue teams in the region. According to Russian sources, there were no casualties or injuries as a result of the fire. 50 people in the building were evacuated. The time and place of the fire is very significant because the building that caught fire in Moscow is an important building known as the Paxton House, built in 1987. The fire is believed to have started in the military property section of the Russian Ministry of Defense building, which deals with facilities across the country. However, the time of the fire is also very important. The fire broke out when Putin was meeting with Lukashenko. Hours before the fire broke out in the Defense Ministry building, Russian leader Vladimir Putin had met with 17 new ambassadors to Moscow. Among these diplomats was the new Russian ambassador to Washington, Leon Tracy. Russian leader Vladimir Putin blamed the West in his meeting with the ambassadors. Putin claimed that Western intelligence agencies were organizing terrorist attacks on Russian soil. According to Putin's statements, the Western intelligence was working with the Ukrainian sabotage and partisan groups. Putin claimed that Western intelligence was supporting the actions of these groups. He therefore warned all ambassadors to react more strongly. The fires that broke out in various regions of Russia dealt a heavy blow to Putin because these fires are not limited to areas belonging to the occupying army and buildings belonging to official institutions. In Russia, fuel depots, natural gas, and oil pipelines are the main areas that are on fire. Putin was able to resist the sanctions imposed by the West and European countries through the supply of natural gas, and oil is losing this power one by one. The explosions in pipelines and fuel tanks seem to be preparing the end of Putin. Russia's defeat against Ukraine is now clearly visible. The Russian media is trying to hide this fact, but without success. Even Russian citizens and former Russian commanders are calling the Russian media liars. Igor Girkin, former Minister of Defense of the Donetsk People's Republic and an officer of the Russian Federal Security Service, said that the Russian media is hiding the truth about what is happening in Ukraine. This behavior of the Russian media harms Russia. Girkin said, "It has a very negative impact on the situation in the whole country, in our entire state." Aware of the realities of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the former Russian commander, Girkin, said that Putin is regressing day by day and that the Russian army will lose the war at this rate. Moreover, Girkin expressed his opinion clearly. Girkin said during the winter we could not push the enemy back even 10 kilometers from Donetsk because we left Kherson. We retreated from the Kharkiv region. We turned back from near Kiev. I am not afraid to say that we are heading towards military defeat. In the early days of the invasion of Ukraine, Putin had the support of most, if not all, of the population. However, Putin's practices and defeats in the war shook the Russian people's trust in Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The injustices suffered by the soldiers in the army and the inhuman practices of the Russian commanders also demotivated the soldiers. Having lost the support of his people and the army, Putin was completely cornered by the sanctions imposed by Western and European countries. The Ukrainian army, which is getting stronger day by day with military aid, made history against the Russian invaders. Putin, who thought that the war would end in a few days, has lost about 200,000 soldiers and tons of ammunition so far. The losses of the Russian army since the day it started occupying Ukraine are as follows: 176,240 military personnel, 3,629 tanks, 7,005 armored combat vehicles, 2,707 artillery systems, 532 reactive spread fire systems, 288 air defense systems, 306 aircraft, 291 helicopters, 5,573 automotive and tank equipment, 18 military ships and boats, 911 cruise missiles, 2,283 unmanned aerial vehicles, 299 special machines for operational tactical missile systems. It seems difficult for Putin to continue the war with these losses because military personnel and ammunition are essential for success in the war. Putin is losing his soldiers and weapons one by one. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, continues to teach Russian invaders great lessons with their historic resistance. Zelensky, who is united with his army and his people, has won the admiration of almost the entire world for his fight for Ukraine's freedom. While Putin chose to be an occupier with his inhuman actions, Zelensky chose to be a hero with his determination and resistance.